This is a Boeing Stearman, a near 100-year-old bi-wing, two-seat design World War II aircraft that has an incredible story that in this video I get the pleasure of flying in with James, its owner and pilot. And not only do we have this incredible golden hour setting, but he also had a surprise up his sleeve for me that absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah, now. That is absolutely incredible.
So other than being a beautiful machine that, yes, is very loud and looks very cold, there's a lot more to this aircraft than meets the eye. So what's the deal with it? What actually is it?
It's a Boeing Stearman. So Stearman were bought by Boeing in the late 30s. This was a PT-17D initially. So it had a Lycoming 9-cylinder radial 225 horsepower engine on the front. Having been rebuilt many times from the 40s, this one was 1943. Up to now, it's had, I think, 2 rebuilds, as in full rebuilds, so it's now got a Continental on the front, which effectively makes it a PT-17. They initially came with a metal propeller. We've gone for a wooden one just because the metal one was very expensive. You have to have it overhauled every 200 hours or something just because it keeps cracking in the hubs. So the ones that I fly for wing walking, they've got a constant speed prop on them, big 8'6" Hartzell metal thing, which is obviously wobbly, and on one of these, but it's got more than twice the horsepower engine, so it's got a Pratt & Whitney Wasp Junior 450 horsepower engine in it. So yeah, I mean, like I say, you think this thing's thirsty at 50-55 litres an hour, that thing's probably burning 100 litres an hour of gas.
So depending on the engines that you have on the Stearman, it will burn between 2 and 4 times as much fuel as the PA28 you see in my videos. And that was the first and the least alarming downside to that beautiful design. And wait until you hear about this particular plane's history.
These things are draggy as they are. All the wires, all the wing struts, 4 wings, big undercarriage. It is a draggy machine. But for what we use this one for, just pure pleasure and flying, it's a joy to fly. So yeah, it's obviously a Second World War trainer is what they were built for. And then throughout the years of, they used them throughout the war and then got rid of them dirt cheap. So loads of farmers bought them up and put hoppers in them, put big Pratt & Whitneys on the front, bigger propellers, and then they used them for crop spraying. So this one was a crop sprayer until about 1958, I think. And then it had an accident, it was rebuilt. And then it flew again, had another accident, had one of the rings rebuilt, and then it came from the States to the UK in about 98. It had one owner and then sold it to the guy who owns the majority share in this.
So after buying a share in an aircraft like this, most importantly, what is it actually like to own and fly?
No, it does get pretty cold after an hour. I mean, in the summer it's great, it's warm enough, but being open cockpit, there's only a limited amount of head buffeting one can stand. So yeah, I mean, it's lovely. It's a charming airplane to fly, and charming is the word that I didn't use until someone said it to me, and it's the word that hits it on the head. Very light in the controls. You'd think it'd be, big and heavy, but actually it's very nice to fly. On the ground, it's a different story because of the fuel tanks in the centre section of the top wing and the engines at the front, the oil tanks between the 2 top wing struts. So all the weight is high up and far forward, which means that when you're trundling down the runway with 2 wheels at the front, 1 at the back one wants to overtake because it's behind the centre of gravity. So the centre of gravity always wants to trail, and therefore it's quite, I'm not going to say pig-headed on the ground, but you have to be lightning fast. On grass it's not so bad, but on tarmac it's pretty nasty. So I guess there's a lot to be said for that. It's big and heavy. If you look at something like the Tiger Moth, which did the same role for the British that this did for the Americans, you're sat in this thing, cockpit's up here and you've got a stick and rudder. This thing is like being sat in a berthing ward. It's brilliant. So that's why we love them. It sounds great, and the 7-cylinder sounds a bit more clattery, but I'm a Ducati enthusiast. I like dry clutches and things. So the Lycoming I fly for a wing walking company's got a 300 horse 9-cylinder. It's very smooth.
A signature to these legacy aircraft are those huge radial engines on the front, and I learned quickly how different these are to normal engines and how some of their drawbacks, shall we say, can and did put James into not 1 but 2 very serious situations. Listen to this.
This is a brand new engine. It's got just under 50 hours on it. It's coming up to its first check in about 8 hours time. We've had 2 loads of oil through it, of mineral oil, because in the other one, the old one, the main bearing that sits in there the Jesus bearing disintegrated while I was flying it. It kept running, but if I had have kept going, I managed to get it back in here. But who knows when it would have stopped.
Yeah.
So engine off, sent to the States, new engine bits inside it, new engine effectively, 0 time engine back, put on the front early summer, so I think it was April, and then we have had a period of bedding it in to make sure that the oil seal around each piston ring is all good, and you sort of bed the engine in.
Yeah.
Still the original prop that we've got on it, but yeah, it's a Continental 7-cylinder radial engine of 220 horsepower, about 11 litre displacement, and it burns about 55 litres an hour. So yeah, this has a couple of new mods. Okay, this is the new mod. Just be careful in the prop arc. You can never trust radials.
Yeah.
But you basically turn it up and to the one side, and any fluid coming out of there is being drained from the bottom 2 cylinders from the new engine.
Right.
Which is 50 hours old. It's just a thing that's, so with radials, you've got obviously these bottom cylinders
That's what I was thinking.
prone to hydraulicking, which is where obviously most oil, water, things like that are incompressible. If you have an oil pool in here, in one of the cylinders, for example, and you start swinging the propeller around, so whether it seeps past piston rings through, you know, whatever reason, these things are never going to be high compression, not like a thoroughbred racing aircraft. There's an Edge 540 in there, which will be some very different, but obviously that's flat. So if oil pools in the bottom of these and you shove a piston down it, it hits the oil before it can escape out of the inlet or exhaust valve, and then you end up bending com rods. You know, if it's bad, it'll blow the com rod out the side of the cylinder, which I've seen at the Reno races. If it's not so bad, you might not know a thing until 6 months, a year later. So to prevent that, what we do is we pull it through before each flight. So if you ever see someone with a radial engine like this, they'll start pulling the propeller through. Everything's off, I've already checked.
Yeah.
Like that, and you're listening for things. You can hear the hiss of the exhaust valves and things like that opening. But also, if you pull it and you suddenly feel it lock, right, we've got oil in one of the cylinders, take the plugs out, drain the oil, and you can listen for all sorts of things. The way we knew the main bearing was failed is because you could turn it around and you could hear bits of metal falling down into the sump. And we found some big chunks like this down in here.
Oh my God.
So I was very lucky. Yeah, but 2 weeks later I did have a full engine failure, but that was for a different aeroplane, different reason, different Stearman. Same, it was the 300 horse. And that was to do with magnetos. It had a single drive mag, so it had single drive into 2 sort of, obviously you've got spark plug there and a spark plug there, both fed by different coils of mags. But it was the drive that was the problem. So luckily it happened on final. So I was in a side slip, and I'm getting really low here, put a load of power on. So kicked off the side slip to try and maintain, you know, a best glide speed, minimum drag and all that kind of stuff. Touchdown was a bit of a non-event, really, rolled to a stop on the runway. But
Just what you want.
2 weeks after that one, then it was another one.
Oh my God.
So that was an expensive week. Yeah.
Let's try not to add to that list this evening. And it sounds like these are almost living beings with the specific care you need to take with owning and operating them. But in my opinion, it's all worth it when you hear just how good these things sound.
Radial engines take, a certain understanding of how they work and how they operate to operate safely and to keep longevity in mind, because also things like if you're flying your normal P28 and you're doing a PFL, you can pull the power back to idle, and you keep warming it to prevent shock cooling and stuff like that with the carb heat on and all that good stuff. If you pull the power back to idle in this, and you stick the nose down, for example, the propeller starts driving the engine rather than the engine driving the propeller. And that can lead to all sorts of lubrication issues, and then you end up with more wear and tear because it's not getting the lubrication it needs from the oil, etc. So there's a lot more things like that you have to have in mind. And because they're the nature of all the metal moving around, we've got a resonance. So between 1500 and 1650 RPM, there's a no-go band where you don't hold the power there because the engine will sit in its vibration resonance, and then again just adding more wear. So there's a lot to think about.
And the last thing before we fly, get a load of this cockpit.
This is your front cockpit seat. Traditionally your instructor would have been in here with a what they call it, a speaking tube, a voice tube, just literally a tube that you shout down so the other guy hears it. These things are deafening enough with a helmet with good passive noise attenuation, or with a Bose. So, you know, a few modern things in here, like the new radio, etc., just to make things all 8.33 compliant and stuff.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's really basic. So you've got your altimeter, your airspeed, 186 miles an hour is our top speed. You'd have to be vertically in a dive with the power on and the prop RPM way through the max to even get anywhere near that. So G meter is good to have. Your VSI overreads, but it's useful. You've got your wet compass, turn and slip, oil pressure, oil temperature, and your RPM goes backwards. Okay. So we don't have an RPM and a manifold pressure like you would on a constant speed aeroplane, because then you set the RPM so that when you're doing aerobatics, it will stay constantly.
It will stay where it's...
where you set it, and then you can adjust the power by adjusting the manifold pressure. Whereas this is just very basic. You've got your mixture, and you've got your throttle, trim, flight controls, fuel. You haven't got mags in here. I've got mags in the back, and your carb heat's under this elbow, which is nice and useful because you can not reach it. Whereas I can in the back. Oh, but your rudder pedals are obviously back there.
That's what you mean
battery in the middle.
Being a spacious cockpit.
Yeah, it's good fun, and it's big open cockpit. So you get lots of air through here. It's tremendously noisy, very uncomfortable after a while, but it's... you want to go fly it?
Let's do it.
Cool.
Let's do it. Fantastic.
So I fueled myself up with one of these Huel meal replacement drinks and one of these nutrition bars. Link in the description for a healthy discount on these. Grabbed my headset and climbed in, and James ran through his checks on the ground, and then we fired up that 11-litre 7-cylinder radial. And I've been shouted at in the comments a few times of having music over the sound of the engine. So, for those people, volume up. Here is some raw Stearman audio.
Clear.
Cockpit audio didn't pick up for some reason, but it gives me a great opportunity to give you an idea of what this experience was actually like, as it was definitely no normal flight. So this was actually shot a few months ago, and I get the exact same smile watching this footage back now while editing it as I did back then. The Stearman smile, they call it. And a candid moment here, because what an amazing evening for a flight this is, let alone experiencing it in an aircraft as special as this. Something I'm incredibly grateful to be able to enjoy, and the surprise James had for me, to my unawareness, was the absolute cherry on top. They're trying to take in as much as possible. We taxied over to runway 04 here at Oaksey airfield, did our run-up checks, etc. at the end, and with the sun setting on not just the day, but the summer in its entirety, we were ready to make best use of the time we have left, give it the full beans, bounce down this grass runway and take to the skies. So here we go. The airfield you normally see me flying from in my videos is Kemble, which is actually right next to this one. But despite flying in basically the exact same airspace, it felt like a whole new world with this aircraft in this setting. So we flew around gradually climbing, and after we built enough altitude, look what happened. So in order for us to be able to do what you're about to see, we need to build enough speed with the assistance of gravity. So every time you see the nose go down like this, something like this is about to happen. And volume up, people. open cockpit with all these cables and the 4 wings in view is just something else, let alone doing all these aeros. And just listen to that engine clatter. James wasn't wrong, the buffeting of the wind was definitely taking its toll, and I'll be open with these viewers here to give some context, and this isn't a sob story at all, but this flight was actually shot on the day that I sadly separated from my long-term girlfriend, and yet despite that, my mind was entirely consumed with the awe of this thing. The clatter of the all-exposed motor inches in front of me, the hammering of the dusk air on my face, along with the beauty of this periphery-filling, bi-wing, bright blue and yellow paint job, and not to mention that beautiful sunset. So to lose altitude more quickly when coming into land, James kicks the side of the plane out, as you can see here, basically using its fuselage as a big draggy sail to reduce lift. It's called a side slip. You then see him kick it straight right before we touch down, despite the fact that this plane is the coldest, most gas-guzzling, least practical, and most complex to run and maintain aircraft I've ever flown in. It's by far my favourite, but the aircraft in this video was a very different story. Thank you so much for watching.
Oh my god. That is amazing.